The use of greenhouse gas emissions have increased throughout the years and is causing negative effects on the environment, primarily global warming. The effects of a warming world are already noticeable and produce negative effects such as an increased frequency and intensity of natural disasters. The potential future effects of global climate change include more frequent wildfires, longer periods of drought in some regions, and an increase in the duration and intensity of tropical storms. Not only does this affect us, but is also resulting in animals dying and no longer having habitable land. Climate change has great effects on many different species and is killing animals every day. Glaciers and ice sheets are shrinking, ocean levels are rising, and waters are warming and becoming more acidic. Marine life. The ocean is the planet's greatest carbon sink. It absorbs about 90% of the heat generated by rising emissions. But the ocean cannot absorb the heat without consequence. When the ocean absorbs sunlight, it causes the ocean's temperature to rise. As excessive heat and energy warm the ocean, the change in temperature leads to disastrous effects. The more sunlight we experience due to climate change, the more the ocean absorbs. The rise in temperature also leads to the melting of ice and sea level rise, marine heat waves, and ocean acidification. The ocean absorbs about 30% of carbon dioxide, which is released into the atmosphere. As levels of atmospheric CO2 increase from human activities such as burning fossil fuels and changing land use, deforestation for example, the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed by the ocean also increases. When CO2 is absorbed by seawater, a series of chemical reactions occur, resulting in increased concentration of hydrogen ions. This causes the ocean to be more acidic. Higher ocean acidity causes things like animal shells and coral to deteriorate. Changes to ocean productivity have implications to the whole food web. This includes fish species and top predators like seabirds, marine mammals, and commercially valuable fish. The ocean becoming warmer and more acidic means melting of glaciers, ice, which can lead to sea level rise, coral bleaching, which causes loss of habitat to animals and more start to die, marine heat waves threaten life of sea creatures living in the area, and more. Coral reefs are the most diverse habitats on the planet. Reefs occur in less than 1% of the ocean, yet are home to nearly 1/4 of all ocean species. The ancient structures make a perfect home for millions of fish, crabs, clams, starfish, sea turtles, and more. The exceptional diversity has given them the nickname rainforests of the sea. Marine heat waves can reduce the range of some species and cause others to disappear locally. Bull kelp is a key part of marine ecosystems. Kelp forests provide shelter and food for dozens of species. It acts as a carbon sink and dampens the effects of waves on the coastline. Marine heat waves have been killing kelp on parts of the west coast, and human-caused climate change is forecast to make these heat waves more frequent and intense. Scientists are studying what people can do to help the kelp, especially as we look to it as a possible ally against carbon emissions. Ocean warming from climate change is expected to increase the division of water into layers due to increased density variance. This may reduce the supply of nutrients needed for phytoplankton growth in subtropical waters in the northern parts of New Zealand. These changes are causing long-lasting impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems. When one type of animal or plant thrives in a better, new environment, it outcompetes other species. This causes a reduction in biodiversity. The health of oceans is strongly dependent upon marine biodiversity. The less biodiversity there is in the water, the harder it makes for other creatures to live and thrive. It affects things like feeding, development, and breeding, as well as the relationships between species. Each species in the ocean has a particular role to play, whether that is marine worms converting organic material into carbon dioxide, or marine plants to photosynthesize, or sharks controlling prey populations. Some species play similar roles in an ecosystem, so if one species becomes extinct, another will be able to carry out the same function or service. Extreme climatic events deplete natural environments as well, for example, erosion or flooding. It disturbs marine life in coastal areas, particularly in certain coastal habitats such as mangroves and seagrass beds, which are vital breeding grounds as well as potential CO2 capture zones. Wildlife. Climate change has undeniable consequences to wildlife and is starting to affect them even more now as we find how bad it's really gotten. Animals all slowly develop over time to best suit their environment, but these changes take millions of years. This is much slower than how fast the current world is changing and heating. Issues start to occur as animals try to adapt to changes in how they feed, breed, and more. Pollinators, for example, must feed from flowers blooming earlier in the year. Plants are flowering about a month earlier in the UK due to climate change. That's according to scientists at University of Cambridge, who recently analyzed the first flowering dates of 406 species and found a link to warmer temperatures in the spring. These researchers compared the first flowering dates before and after 1986 and found an average shift of 26 days earlier in the year. Earlier flowerings could lead to gaps in resources like pollen and nectar, leaving bees hungry. Other animals may find their habitats are no longer able to support their biology, such as polar bears. While polar bears are strong swimmers, capable of swimming for hours on end, they find swimming much more energy intensive than walking. As such, sea ice is crucial for polar bears to survive. Rising temperatures risk destabilizing the balance between wildlife and their ecosystem. While most animals don't thrive under these extreme weather conditions, some flourish in warmer temperatures. Jellyfish, for example. But not all wildlife belongs where they flourish. Sometimes animals such as invasive species will thrive in a new climate. These invasive species can wreak havoc in ecosystems, preying on or competing with native species, spreading novel diseases such as the white pine blister rust, a fungal pathogen introduced to North America from Asia in the early 1900s, threatening native white pines with no innate resistance, or otherwise fundamentally changing habitat and ecological processes. Unfortunately, ecosystems affected by invasive species are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. In habitats that are becoming warmer and drier due to climate change, invasive species can serve as additional fuel for wildfires, resulting in more frequent and severe fire events. Increased precipitation from climate change is contributing to more frequent and extreme weather events such as flooding. The higher frequency of flooding has dangerous effects on wildlife because it can destroy key pieces of ecosystems and habitats. There's a destructive effect that floods have on the environment, such as flooded land, burned forests, and severe water pollution that can cause other issues. New locations of standing water can drown tree roots. Rising temperatures affect vegetation, food sources, access to water, and much more. Ecosystems may become inhabitable for certain animals, forcing wildlife to migrate outside of their usual patterns in search for food and livable conditions, while causing other animals to die off. Deforestation and habitat loss also harm the natural cycles of the ecosystem, affecting all stages of animal life from reproduction to migration to mating. For most species, survivability depends on geographic range. The tropics are biodiversity hotspots with lots of small-range species. If 1 hectare of a tropical forest is converted to agricultural land, a lot more species lose larger proportions of their home in places like Europe, said Dr. Robert Bayer of the University of Cambridge's Department of Zoology. Some species are more heavily impacted than others. A worrying 16% of species have lost over half of their estimated natural historical range, a figure that could rise by 26% by the end of the century. Species' geographical ranges were found to have recently shrunk most significantly in the tropical areas. Until around 50 years ago, most agricultural developments were in Europe and North America. Since then, larger areas of the land have converted for agriculture in the tropics. Clearance of rainforests for oil palm plantations in Southeast Asia and for pasture land in South America, for example. Solutions. Not all is lost. There are many ways that people can help climate change. There are many things people can do today that will make an impact and reduce the effects of climate change. One thing that has already been talked about a lot is reducing the amount of plastic we buy or use. Plastic is not only terrible for the environment, but can impact animals tremendously. A lot of the plastic we throw out ends up in the ocean and kills and injures many animals. Marine wildlife, such as seabirds, whales, fish, and turtles, mistake plastic waste for prey. Most then die of starvation as their stomachs become filled with plastic. When they eat it, it doesn't provide the nutrients and blocks the digestive system, so the animal ends up starving to death. They also suffer from infections, reduced ability to swim, and internal injuries. Another thing that can help nature is to plant our own native species. Creating planet and wildlife-friendly environments can start right in your own backyard and in your community. Plant native species of trees, bushes, and plants, especially those that flower and provide food sources for wild animals. Trees recycle oxygen, returning it to the atmosphere for us to breathe and absorbing potential harmful gases along the way. This is beneficial to us and to the animals. One more way to help is to volunteer. Volunteering is a great way to not only give back to the community, but to find new friends and hobbies. Check with others around you and Google for different activities in your area. For example, you could volunteer to help clean up a beach or park, build a garden, or even just go to protest about climate change. These small things can make great impacts. A few more ways to help are to avoid harmful chemicals, such as cleaning chemicals. Find eco-friendly substitutes such as the brand Blueland. Pick up trash, buy or use less single-use plastic and containers, and donate to climate change charities or shelters.